Welcome to the Point. The most pressing issue right now for the state legislature is getting a budget done for next year. The House and Senate Appropriations Committees have or will soon finalize their spending plans and move them to the full body. This week, however, with the governor out of the country, there seemed to be less urgency about getting the process completed. The question that remains is, will Democrats be successful in getting enough Republicans in the Senate to vote in favor of immediate effect? That's necessary for the bills to become law by the new fiscal year, October 1st. We're watching the progress of the budget. We'll continue to keep you updated. But the budget is not the only thing that lawmakers are focused on. Grand Rapids freshman Democrat Kristen Grant finds herself in an enviable position, a first-time member in the majority for the first time for Democrats in decades. Earlier this year, she proposed revitalizing some urban areas for business and housing, and in remarkably short order, it would appear that some of those objectives will become reality. Representative, let's start by talking about what can only be described as a remarkable session. The first 6 months of a new legislature with a new majority, and you coming in as a freshman in that majority. First time in 40 years, Democrats have held all the gavels in the House, and the Senate, the governor's office. So there has been a lot going on in a short period of time. Now, you're no stranger to dealing with big agendas from the school board on, but this has had to be an interesting learning curve for you as you stepped in the State House.
It has. You know, we've been moving full speed. We have 40 years worth of work to do, and we have some amazing supporters who are reminding us of that work that needs to be done. So it's been a huge learning curve, but we have such an amazing caucus and team where we're all really learning together right now, learning about how to lead and what will be our leading style. So it's been an exciting time.
You talk about those supporters who keep reminding you. How difficult is it? Because there are a number of things that you can do, and there are a number of things that you have done as a body. But there are also limitations. Even though you're in the majority, there are some things that may be a bridge too far. How difficult is that to make constituents understand who literally want to go for everything all at once because of all of that pent-up desire?
I mean, you know, if you look at history and you look at data, it proves that in places where the districts are cut more evenly as they are now, that sometimes you have more frequent changes in power. And so I understand why everyone's like, do this right now, we may not, you know, have next time. But in order to actually stay in the majority and to make this a state where we're able to serve everyone who is here, we have to pace ourselves. And that's really a hard conversation to have. We can't do everything all at once because we need to do things for everyone. And that's something that our caucus is learning to do. It's more so leadership that's having those conversations. But I really do hope that people can understand. We want to be here 30 years from now, so we have to take the long view with things.
And there is another reality, and we don't have to go too far into this, but this is a unique moment for spending in the state.
Yes.
And so when the next budget is being put together, there will be billions and billions of dollars less to deal with. So you have to keep that in mind when you're going forward to make those big obligations. Let's talk about something I think is pretty remarkable. It was early on. I forget the date, and I apologize for that. But you had a gathering of legislators, including the Senate Majority Leader and Speaker of the House, not a few blocks from here.
Yeah.
And we came down and listened to folks talk about revitalizing, which is a subject I've heard for decades, but you and your colleagues were talking about some real specifics, and you can get into more detail, but you were talking about going into areas that had maybe once been manufacturing sites. We have a lot of those in and around the Grand Rapids area in your district that are no longer being used, but they're not being used for anything because they may require cleanup, they may require demolition, may require both, may require some zoning changes.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot going on there. And you said what you wanted to do, kind of in a nutshell, was revitalize some of the places and get them ready for these big new companies that are coming in, and make sure there's adequate housing for people who can live close to their work if they're going to work in those places, and get more housing into areas like the urban centers for folks in the state. Fast forward to Mackinac Island, Governor, with you standing in a crowd of legislators, announces a plan that would focus on those two issues, not just getting, the big programs, but getting people places to live so they can make an adequate living and they can prosper and they can have these new places come together and do revitalization.
Yeah.
So in a matter of 6 months, one of your priorities seems well on the way to becoming, to being a reality. What's that like for you?
Yeah, that's amazing. My passion and really my focus has been economic development since day one, and really urban economic development. We have urban cores across the state that have not been invested in for a long time. And a lot of times we look at those neighborhoods and communities, we say, what's wrong with those people? Why aren't their houses nice? Why aren't their yards done? But there is a partnership that happens between local government, state government, when they invest in infrastructure and they invest in job opportunities, and the community coming alongside them. And when one isn't doing their part, when investments aren't being made, then that affects the access that people have to jobs, to equity, to many other things. And it creates some inequality there in the access that people have to wealth as well as their quality of life. So we can talk about so many things that need to happen to really create equity. But to me, the main thing we need to talk about is investment development that results in people having wealth building opportunities. So, right at the beginning of the year, the state invested $700 million into a large Ford project. And my question was, what about the smaller sites that we have that are in our urban cores? Instead of going out into acres and acres of farmland right around the corner, so many people can say there was once a bustling, workforce here, and they're gone. How are we connecting those to the really big opportunities, helping some small businesses be able to scale up? And we know that small businesses hire people from their community. People love to work near them. So I just wanted to make sure we were making connections from the really big projects to the smaller, everyday projects that people know and would grow to love.
Because the vast majority of job growth will come through smaller businesses.
Absolutely.
It always does.
And in our urban cores, that's where our workforce came and made us the manufacturing leader that we have been in the world. And so even as we evolve to EV and other things, we can't forget those urban cores. We have to bring those people along.
So this process is rolling along pretty well right now. So how do you go back into the community? I know it's not all finalized and there still have to be things done. As we sit here and speak, budgets are not done. This will require financing, but all of that will be for another show. So what do you tell the folks in the community? Are you helping them get ready for the prospect that they may have the opportunity to turn that old site into something that's going to be productive again?
Yeah, we are planning conversations right now. So as the legislature takes a summer break in July and August, we are already planning a listening tour that will kick off in Grand Rapids. So following up on that March event where we said the March event was just for legislators to talk about, legislators and community partners to talk about what could be done. How do you pair dollars with policy to get the best impact? And now we're coming back once the budget is announced to come to some of those urban cores around the state and say, this is how we heard you, this is how the budget reflects it, now let's go create some change in our communities.
And one of the things that when we have these kind of conversations, I always try to make clear is these things won't happen overnight.
They won't.
This is going to be a process and something that we'll be following. Let's talk about some of the other things that have been going on. There's so much that has gone on in the first 6 months, but just this past week, you and the House dealt with some child marriage laws and changing laws that some of our reporters here have examined over a long time. Tell me what changes you made and tell me why you felt like those needed to be made.
So I was a part of a package that was introduced by Representative Kara Hope. And basically that was a package of about 8 or 9 bills that really addressed everywhere that child marriage is allowed or even loopholes where it is allowed in our state law. And, 43 other states have completely banned child marriage. And
that's marriage, anybody
18 or younger.
Under 18.
Yes. And in Michigan, legislatures on the Democratic side have continuously tried to introduce a package that would do that same thing. It's been introduced at least 4 times, and the Republicans would never take it up. So finally, we were able to introduce it and take it up and just say that it is not okay. Child marriage is not okay. It's a form of abuse. When you look at the data and the history, 88% of child marriages are very young girls being married to much older men. They never really are able to reach their own financial stability. They don't acquire education. There are so many things. And of course, there are probably some separate cases, but we're talking in broad numbers. And so when we look at the majority of people who are a part of child marriage and what it does to their life, along with all the other things that could be happening, we just said we need to take a stand as a state and protect our children. And as a mother, that was so important for me. It was an honor to be a part of that bill and to see it cross the finish line in the House.
So as of this moment, parents could sign for children to be married that were
As
under
of this
18?
moment, parents could sign. There are closed door marriages where it would be like in private with a judge. There are just so many ways that it could happen, and this will say that none of that is allowable anymore.
We've got about 30 seconds left, and I just get your take on this. I know you had big expectations going into this session. It has been, as I said at the top of the show, a remarkable one. Is this what you expected?
This has exceeded my expectations. That doesn't happen often, my staff will tell you. So I will say I've been having a ball. It's been a great ride, and I look forward to this summer and fall session.
Do you think fall session is going to be a little slower pace, perhaps?
Not at all.
When we come back, one appropriator talks about the process and some of his other projects. Next, To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Republican Representative Bradley Slagh from Zeeland is in his 3rd term in the House and has been doing budget work as well as dealing with some unique constituent services. He joined me this week to talk about both. Representative, let's talk about this session. About 6 months so far. It has been rapid fire, Democrats in control. It's a new world for you as a Republican who has served your previous terms in the majority.
Yes.
So let's just talk kind of generically how it's been different. Obviously, committee chairmanships all go to Democrats. Agenda all goes to Democrats. What has it been like for you?
You know, it has been an eye-opening experience. How's that as a start? When I was in local government, township, county government, you know, being majority-minority really didn't seem to make near the kind of difference it does when you hold a gavel in the State House. Obviously, that would be true of the Senate as well. So I've learned lots about politics in the first 4 years that I've been there. This 6 months, I've learned a lot about being less important than maybe I thought I was before.
Interesting comment, because so many people that come out of county, township, even city governments that are supposedly nonpartisan in some cases, but they clearly have partisan divides.
Oh, sure.
But they end up working together. It's different because it's not as big of a budget, you don't have as much latitude, and you're very close to where you answer to the people that you're serving. And while it should be true at the State House and State Senate levels, it does start, you know, to get a little more removed. What has been your biggest surprise about being in the minority, other than not maybe being as important as you thought you were, which I think is a remarkable comment?
All right. Probably the thing that's impacted me the most is the lack of having an idea of what we're going to work on during a single day. I mean, we've had days that we don't get an idea of what bills we're going to work on until 10, 12 minutes in advance. That's the first time we've seen the bill. We may have had an idea that it might be coming, but we've never seen the bill. How do you plan for, how do you help draft it? I think the other thing for me is it's been really interesting to see that you don't have as much input maybe as you'd like to have. And being there the first 2 years, I felt like we had given more opportunity for people to speak into stuff than what I've now seen in this last 6 months.
And of course, I should only say in fairness that for years and years and years, Democrats told me the same thing about
Could be.
Republicans when they're in charge. And since I'm not in those committees, or certainly not in all that work, I don't know, but I know that it is a big switch. Let's talk about your position on appropriations. And as you and I sit here today, we don't know what the final budget bills are going to look like. We've got probably a pretty good idea, but we also don't know when they're going to pass. It is not totally impossible that by the time this airs, they will have passed, and I will make that notation when we tape the wraps, as we call it. But what has that been like? Because you're, I mean, you're an appropriator. You're vice chair of one of the committees, Republican chair of one of the committees, and you oversee military and veterans affairs as well. That's, I mean, that's not your committee, but you're a member of that. And then talk about your vice chairmanship and a little bit of what the budget process has been like compared to what it was like previously.
Yeah, you know, we know less. Obviously, if you're in the minority, you just know less about what's going on. My corrections budget that I sit on, Amos O'Neill is the our ranking member, our chair for that committee, and he has done a great job of just keeping us in the loop as much as possible, and even in light of the fact that you don't give away all of your secrets, right? But he's truly kept us in the loop, and it's great to work with him. He's an awesome guy, and I feel like Jason Morgan in the State Police Veterans Affairs has done the same thing. As much as he could, he's provided information for us as the chair, which I felt like he's been really fair about doing that. I've listened to some other folks, and they've not necessarily had the same kind of outcomes as I have. So obviously the other people feel like it's not as good, but I've been very pleased with the committees I've been on.
When this is all said and done, this is going to be very much about Democratic priorities. First time in 40 years they've had the opportunity to do that, and it will be no surprise that they take those. Just in general, not knowing all the details, do you feel like that all districts are going to be represented in this budget? Obviously, some things will apply to every district, but do you feel like for all those projects that may be specific to yours or other Republican districts, are those at least being addressed?
And I guess I'm not probably far enough up the leadership poll to know how that really is all going to pan out. I feel like the stuff that I've been involved in, our area will be represented. But obviously, when you just deal with corrections, state police, military, that doesn't necessarily impact heavily in my community.
I want to talk about something that you and I were discussing just before we came in the studio, and I find this fascinating, partially because at one time I had a small piece of land big enough for people to hunt on, and anybody who's had that in Michigan has probably had an occasion to maybe find someone who is hunting without your permission. And this came up for one of your constituents.
Yeah.
So tell me the story, because the idea about access is the thing that struck me about this story. So,
yeah. So one of my constituents gave us a call and said, hey, we've got property. We've got people who are walking onto our property, and we're trying to stop that from happening. In the process, we've gotten a hold of the conservation officers who said, based on the law, as we can read it, every entrance point to your property has to have a sign, or otherwise it's not signed enough to be able to keep trespassers out and for us to prosecute.
So you need a posted sign on every access point. I would say that would be every gate. If it isn't fenced, I would say maybe every obvious trail.
Yeah, paved path, whatever. You would think those would be the only.
That's not what they said.
That's not what they said. They said if there's a gap even between two trees, it's probably an access point, and you should post it. So the result of that is we went to the DNR. We've gone to several other places and said, okay, how about if we put in a specific number of feet? So you should be expected to be able to see something within 250 feet. So 250 is a number we've got, 250 feet from sign to sign, minimum as a max. It could be closer than that. And we're going to run it up the ladder. We'll see how it works.
You know, that's another change, isn't it? Because Democrats talked about this a lot, and I'm sure Republicans will already have experienced this. The majority gets to set the entire agenda. And even if the majority agrees with the bills or bill, however it is, that you put forward, it may end up being introduced by a Democrat.
Sure.
Rather than a Republican.
Yep.
And I guess at some point, it doesn't matter too much to you as long as it gets done.
That's exactly right. Once again, I think that our goal is how do we do great law, and if not great, how do we do good law that really impacts our state, benefits our people, and gets things done. And if somebody else has to do that, here it is, here's what we'll have to do. I was able to get multiple people to co-sign from both sides of the aisle. So they obviously, the people that I talked to said, oh, yeah, this makes sense. Let's try and do that.
And that's a good start, as always. I hate to do this to you because we're down pretty much inside 2 minutes. And the next thing I want to talk about is going to take some explanation. So talk to me about capping or uncapping property tax values.
Yes.
And what you are proposing.
Yeah. So a law changed in 2014 that allowed property to not be uncapped when it was a transfer from like a father to a son. So no uncapping, you were able to keep the property taxes the same. In 2021, they started saying, well, wait a minute, if you went from a father to a son, but the son is married, now 50% of it becomes uncapped, and so the taxes on that are going to go up. This bill that I wrote would say, no, it doesn't. It stays with our assumption of what happened in 2014, that property doesn't become uncapped as long as it's an actual transfer from a close blood relative, i.e. father, son, even if there's a spouse engaged in that.
I'm going to try to explain this quickly. In the state of Michigan, when you own a property, your property tax level gets capped,
Yes.
and it remains so
Yeah, it has
within the limits.
Yeah.
While you own that home. So even though your property value hopefully does go up more substantially, you have a narrow range in which you can raise that property tax,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
So then when you sell your property, I sell something to you, non-related, then the tax will be assumed on the new value of the house, not the value which I paid for.
That is correct.
So by stopping that cap from coming off, it gives that advantage going on to family members.
Right.
That's a layman's explanation. 30 seconds left. Given where we are in the legislature today, given the fact that there has been a lot happening in this first 6 months, do we expect the next 6 months to calm down and be more activity that it involves Republicans? Because a lot of bills are passed with very little Republican support.
Yeah, I would love to say that that's going to be true. I do not know that to be true. It seems like every time I thought we had hit this big thing and passed a whole bunch of stuff, we're now doing it one more time. So I don't know, Rick. Great question.
In the next week, I fully expect the legislature to finalize budgets and pass them through both chambers. If they get the votes they need for immediate effect in the Senate, both chambers will likely recess for the summer, returning the first full week of September. If they don't, we could be in uncharted territory, at least in recent history, that could result in some unique moves to get a budget enacted. That's a bridge we'll cross if it becomes necessary next week. To the point.